Paul, remember to unmute.
I did unmute,
Okay.
but I'm not sure that my slideshare is working.
Yeah, well, we see Rick. It's not the full screen, but we do see him.
I'm
Yeah,
going to
we
try,
see your
I'm
PowerPoint. We're
Oops.
not the
Now we
full
don't.
screen.
going to
Yeah.
try again because I think for some reason it did not come the way it should across my screen.
Yeah, we're seeing your actual PowerPoint, not the full screen, but it's fine. It's good enough.
All right. Well, if we're good enough, then let me proceed.
And
And
by the way, that 220 should be a 240 now.
oh, all right. I'll fix that. Thank you. Sure. That's a couple years old,
Well,
isn't it?
not
Yeah.
400 though, 240.
Oh, right. 240. Yeah, numbers are often a problem for me. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the ongoing Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. Now in August of the end of the sixth year that we've been meeting every Monday evening to share across the Rigdon and Smith spectrum with people who are interested in the Book of Mormon, people who have presentations that are in sometimes a rather indirect way related. Often, most of the time, they're pretty closely related. And if you want to give a presentation and have some questions about that, I'm pretty confident that I can find a way to either get it connected or else modify it to where it will work because we've just had such a delightful assortment of presentations. And Rick Bennett is one of the presenters that has come back to us time after time. And this evening he's with us to share with us about temples. He has interviewed over 240 people in his podcasts, which are the Gospel Tangents podcast. And that includes me. It includes Deb Luce and Stacy Cram
And
and
now our favorite Pentecostal preacher, we can't forget him either,
yeah.
especially since he's here.
Oh, we got Chris Thomas on. All right, Christopher Thomas is one of our regular presenters as well. Oh, and by the way, another of our Pentecostal, not, he's not Pentecostal, he's evangelical, invited me to drop him in at any time we have a dropout, because he wants to come back and speak with us again. And that, of course, is from Florida, um,
Steve
Stephen
Pineacre.
Pineacker.
Stephen Pinecker. Thank you. Anyway, we we had the privilege tonight of the person who gave us the presentation a month ago, on the statistical opportunities to consider the number of children that Joseph Smith would have had with his extraneous wives, presuming that they were. And it was a fascinating presentation to suggest that as we get more and more options out there, then clearly it becomes statistically more curious for the statistician to pursue. He comes to us with history interest enough to have come to dig with me at Nauvoo. He worked on the second times the season site there. He's married, has three children, and um, will be talking with us about temples tonight. And I anticipate, since he's just warned us that it's going to be a two-session presentation, that and he indicated this would be the second presentation being given first. So the second one, I think, will be coming to us probably in November. But let's introduce our activities with prayer. And so join me if you would please. Creator of the awesome temple of this earth and of the temples of our lives, giving us the potential of eternal worth. We bow in appreciation of the sacred, both in dimensions beyond our notable four that we see exist, and in the depth, width, breadth, and time fractals which so limit us, causing our inquiry to persist. Forward. We understand you create in each of us something sacred, a spiritual altar, a veil we sometimes penetrate in visions, sensual ecstasy, or dreams. And we at our best do consecrate, we dedicate our lives to serve, to implement, to expedite the enlightening beams. Yet we fall short. Our attitudes deplore, for we live in a world at war. Our purposes abort. We tend to be selfish at our core. So this evening, as we share the insights of Brother Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents, we ask for your spirit to guide and stand beside. For the temples we are, those we build, those in which we worship, we ask that in them you abide. For it is such a privilege to live, to be alive in this beautiful temple we call earth, and to be part of your eternal creation, being considered creatures of worth. Thank you, and we praise you in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Amen. All right, I'm ready to stop sharing and hand it over to Rick Bennett for his presentation. Rick, your option to decide whether you want us to be able to interrupt you or wait until you've presented and then jump into the questions. Which do you prefer?
It'll probably be easier to wait to the end, but if people want to interrupt me, that is perfectly fine. So I don't have a problem with that either. So
Good
either
enough.
way.
Good enough. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's see. I'm going to try very hard to share my screen, and hopefully you will see a picture of the Nauvoo temple. Is that what you see? Yeah, this is Nauvoo. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So the last time I presented, Boyd asked a question about temples, and my presentation wasn't about temples, and so I didn't give him a very good answer, or at least I didn't think it was satisfactory. And he got me thinking, and then another thing happened along the way, and so Dialogue Magazine is doing a call for papers, and I think the deadline to submit is October 15th. And so I thought, oh, so this kind of gave me like an incentive to like put this temple presentation together. Now, one of the frustrating things for me, I didn't know. I always hated English in high school. I wasn't really a writer, but I've kind of become one. And I got up to 8,000 words and I wasn't close to being done with this paper. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to split this into two. And, um, so I've basically split it into two, and I want to focus. So paper number one, which I'm not going to present today, but maybe in November, just put me on the schedule in November anytime. I don't care. That's fine. Um, that'll give me time to finish paper one. So paper one is going to focus on it's going to be focused more on Book of Mormon stuff than this one will. This one's kind of the sequel to that one, and talk mostly about LDS ideas about the temple. But Boyd's question was, how come other restoration groups don't do temple stuff? And I named one group that did, the Strangites. We're going to talk about them today, but there's actually some other groups out there that aren't as well known. And so today's presentation is going to focus basically on non-LDS temples within the restoration. I kind of think I want to steal Steve Shields' title and call this Divergent Temples of the Restoration. I really like the ring of that, but I'm totally stealing it from Steve Shields. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So this is kind of presentation two, but it's out of order. So
Let me interrupt you, Rick. I put you last week. I scheduled you for presentation on number one on October 26th. So
okay, that's fine.
That one was already agreed upon. I'd forgotten that but now we also have some booked into November. So our next opening is November 16th.
Okay, yeah, the October date is fine with me. That's perfect.
Okay, good.
So this question really, or this presentation really, you can either thank or blame Boyd, whichever you prefer. I'm going to thank Boyd because he really caused me to think about this issue, and it's become really fun. I'm up to like between the two presentations, I'm up to at least 15,000 words. Um, and so, but the funny thing is, I was like, oh, I got to put this in. I got to put this in. So I've really been just like working up till this moment, and it's not done yet. But it's pretty good. So anyway, want to talk about kind of some. And then, by the way, I should also mention that last night I interviewed John Hamer more about Temples of the Restoration, but there's no way I had time to put that in this presentation. And of course, that's going to be fun, and that'll probably be released in a couple of weeks. Because we go through a lot of this information, and it's really I I love talking to John Hamer, so it's going to be fun. But at any rate, so the interesting thing about the restoration is, the first temple, the first announced temple was in Jackson County, Missouri, which of course was never built. The second temple announced was the Kirtland Temple, and then the third temple was, of course, the Nauvoo Temple. And so, of course, during the Nauvoo Temple was under construction when Joseph Smith was killed in 1844. And so at that point, the restoration kind of shattered and split into lots of different groups, and we're going to talk about a lot of those groups today. And so the ideas about the temple also diverged dramatically. And so Joseph Smith's assassination um, divided the restoration geographically, and it also fractured the unified theology of the Mormon temple. So we're going to talk about some of the scattered rites that went in vastly different directions among several different groups. Um, and so here we go. If I can change my slide there. All right. So in Nauvoo, during Joseph Smith's life, definitely so Joseph joined the Masonic temple or the Masonic lodge in Nauvoo, and it's pretty clear that his exposure to Masonry influenced a lot of what became the Nauvoo temple endowment. And so early, especially LDS leaders, viewed the endowment as a restoration of true celestial masonry. And so they adopted a lot of the Masonic roles uh, and rites and symbols. And so the LDS really still to this day have a lot of Masonic imagery, and you can see the Masonic influence on the LDS endowment ceremony, and that's actually a lot more of paper one, and I'm not going to go into that in great detail today, but I'll do that in October. And so also one of the other innovations in Nauvoo, as opposed to the Kirtland Temple, was proxy baptisms for the dead, eternal sealings, and of course, plural marriage. And so unlike additional traditional American craft masonry, uh, which strictly excluded women, Joseph Smith included women alongside the men in a sacred drama of the Holy Order, setting a profound precedent for female liturgical authority. And one of the surprises in my research over the past month or two, really month, in learning about this was the integration of female priesthood in some of the other restoration movements that we aren't really that familiar with. And even Maxine Hanks and Michael Quinn and Margaret Toscano, some LDS scholars, have argued that even in the LDS Church is known for not ordaining women. Michael Quinn wrote an article called "LDS Women Have Held the Priesthood Since 1843," and Michael Quinn, Margaret Toscano, Maxine Hanks argue that the temple endowment endowed women with priesthood. Now, I think that's on the next slide. So we kind of have a few different ideas about priesthood. Jonathan Stapley, in his book, The Mysteries of Godliness, I think that's the name of it, talks about, and I just talked to Jonathan a few months ago. He's also got a new book about the temple called Holiness to the Lord. In the Mysteries of Godliness, he introduces a new term called cosmological priesthood. And earlier this year, when I talked to him, he said he didn't like that idea anymore. But I don't know what else to call it, so I'm going to stick with it because that's what was in his book. But it's this idea that cosmological priesthood is different than ecclesiastical priesthood. A lot of times in the LDS Church, we conflate the two together. Ecclesiastical priesthood is easy to understand. You've got a prophet, you've got apostles, bishops, 70s, very hierarchically driven, very visible. When you would talk about priesthood, we, that's typically what a lot of people think. Um, but there's also a kind of a charismatic or a priesthood. That's not the domain of men only. And in Jonathan's book, uh, Mysteries of Godliness, he talks about this cosmological priesthood as an interconnected heavenly network physically materialized through the temple altar rituals. And those include marital sealings, parent-child adoptions, and proxy works. Um, and so and then, of course, the RLDS Church or the Community of Christ has a very different idea about priesthood, and me and John Hamer talked a lot about that yesterday. I don't think that made it into these slides, but kind of to go back to Boyd's question from a month or two ago, he said, "Why don't some of these other groups?" Do like LDS sealings, and that sort of a thing. And so there were some groups that actually did. The Lyman White, who is an apostle, he went to Texas. A lot of times we call those the Whiteites, were the first group, even before Brigham Young, to build a temple west of the Mississippi in Texas, Zodiac, Texas. The building has since fallen into disrepair and destroyed. There was a big flood even when Lyman White was alive, but that was built in 1849. So it's about 30 years before the St. George Temple in Utah. Lyman White had already built a temple, or John Hamer would argue it's an endowment house, but whatever. I'm not going to quibble on terminology. Lyman White built a temple in Texas in 1849, and it carries a lot of the same similarities that LDS temple worship did. And I don't want to go too far into that, but just kind of introduce some of these. The Strangites in Wisconsin and Beaver Island, Michigan, also had an LDS style endowment and sealings and that sort of a thing. Briefly, I think most people know, but just maybe some people don't. James Strang, on the day that Joseph Smith was killed, June 27th, 1844, claims an angel came to him and ordained him to be the new prophet. And of course, he's also got the letter of appointment. And so he developed a lot of similar to LES endowments and sealings and baptisms for the dead and all that sort of thing. Third, we have the Cutlerites, who are just a couple of blocks down the road from the Independence Temple. They have a kind of a church temple there, the main floor. And for people who live in Missouri are probably familiar with that. But the Cutlerites to this day, although they're dwindling in numbers greatly, still practice endowments, baptisms for the dead, sealings, and most scholars would argue that theirs is the most unchanged since the 1840s. Um, and so anyway, so those are three other groups that did maintain kind of, if I can say, LDS style temple worship. Now, the Community of Christ, or our LDS Church, rejected a lot of those Nauvoo innovations. Um, the Temple Lot Church, just across the street from the Independence Temple, and also rejected much of Nauvoo, and the Bickertonite Church rejected um, Nauvoo as well. So, and a lot of you are Community of Christ here. You're very familiar. Getting away from Nauvoo, the Community of Christ, and I guess I could even argue the Temple Lot Church or the Church of Christ, have tried to go back to Kirtland style temple worship, where it's a public building, it's for public worship, it's a house of learning, a house of prayer, kind of following that. I can't remember which section that is in the Doctrine and Covenants. The Bickertonites also are interesting. I was talking to John last night. One of the things that caught my attention was he said, so for those who don't understand the Bickertonites, so Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young basically excommunicated each other following the death of Joseph Smith. Sidney had been called on a mission to Pittsburgh to establish residency because he was the vice presidential running mate. And for electoral reasons, it's good that the president and the vice president are from different states. So he moved back to kind of his hometown of Pittsburgh, established residency, started a church, and then that church kind of fell apart, and William Bickerton kind of picked up the pieces and kept Sidney Rigdon's church going. So John told me last night, I thought this was interesting, that they had reached out to the Bickertonite Church, and because they were trying to open up the Kirtland Temple to other restoration groups, and were like, would you be interested in coming here and holding some church services or whatever? And he said he was surprised by their indifference because they were like, no, not really, we don't care. So they don't even really, the temple worship's kind of not even on their radar. So those are the kind of the three of the groups that have rejected, and this is not a comprehensive list, but I think it's a good sampling of many of the different restoration groups. Of course, we have here in the Rocky Mountain region the fundamentalists who wanted to preserve polygamy have now.
Rick, let me interrupt if I may, please, because I do have an angle on that Bickertonite approach. Josh Gailey is an evangelist for the Bickertonites, and he is also somebody with archaeological background. So at the time that the Kirtland Temple was still in the hands of the Community of Christ, I put together a proposal that we should have a bicentennial at 2030 archaeological investigation at the Kirtland Temple to find the remains of the print shop that was there, that burned, I believe, 1838 or 7. And Josh was extremely interested in that activity, and was confident that his church and ours and the LDS and everybody would be able to work together on that. With the change of stewardship, Kirtland Temple having been sold to the Sea of Christ, to the LDS, that of course has all fallen through. But because Josh was so anxious to be part of the inner networking of that archaeological investigation at the temple site, I wanted to bring that in to support the that dimension of their contribution, or possible contribution.
Oh yeah. Seth Bryant's talked about that. He's like, I think they should put the bank back too. It was right next door to the temple.
Yeah. You said that, Josh. Yeah.
So yeah, that was great. Thanks, Paul. Moving to the Rocky Mountains, we have the fundamentalist polygamists here in the Rocky Mountain region. So that would include the FLDS Church, the AUB, or Apostolic United Brethren, and Christ Church. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit here in the future, or in a few slides. And they wanted to preserve a lot of the plural marriage aspects, and to restore a lot of the thing, a lot of, some sacred rites that the LDS have kind of moved away from, and they've brought back, such as law of adoption, the oath of vengeance, which we'll talk about a little bit, and some things that LDS were a little bit more uncomfortable with and got rid of. And then finally, we'll talk about some of these groups that don't require a physical building. So David Fairman's group, the Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship, they do internet endowments and sealings and whatever. You can do it over Zoom. You don't need a physical building. You can kind of do it in your home. Reformed Mormonism is very similar. They'll work with you on, maybe building a home altar or whatever. And then this one was a real surprise to me. There's some really interesting Haitian practices that I will be talking about. So anyway, those are this is just kind of a sampling, but I think it's a good sampling of kind of the different temple worship practices that other groups are doing. So let's talk about the Whiteite tradition in Texas. So the Zodiac Temple was built, as I said earlier, in 1849. It's the first temple west of the Mississippi. Lyman White utilized proxy baptisms and the law of adoption to assert priesthood independence from Brigham Young. The Whiteite tradition, this is really interesting. A lot of this comes from Mel Johnson's book, Polygamy on the Pedernales. Basically, what happened before Joseph Smith's death, Joseph had sent Lyman White on a mission to Wisconsin to get lumber. And then after that mission, Lyman was supposed to go to the Republic of Texas, a technically separate country from the United States. In 1849, it wasn't part of the United States. And so Sam Houston had invited the Mormons to come. There was a lot going on in Nauvoo. Eventually, they were kicked out. The Mormons were kicked out. And so at Joseph Smith's death, Brigham Young said, "I want you to come with us to Utah." And Lyman said, "No, Brigham Young, Joseph Smith sent me to Texas. I'm going to Texas like the mission was." And so as part of his calling on the Council of 50, Lyman White went to Texas and built the Zodiac Temple. Now, some of the interesting things. So the Lyman White's group also practiced polygamy secretly. One of the interesting things about that was they hypocritically, in Mel Johnson's word, accused the Brighamites of practicing polygamy while they were secretly practicing it themselves. And to conceal the polygamy, women utilized their maiden names and as well as during like proxy baptisms for the dead and things like that. And they use their maiden names on the census to avoid detection of the polygamy that was going on in that group. So that was very interesting. So the Whiteites and the LDS would have some very similar temple traditions, similar plural marriage sealings, and that sort of thing. The Strangite tradition in Michigan and Wisconsin. So James Strang also had been sent on a mission to Wisconsin, and initially rejected polygamy. He wasn't a novice insider like Lyman White was, but then he gained some very influential followers: John C. Bennett, William Marks, William Smith, Joseph's brother, and so it seems like some of those other insiders, even though John C. Bennett was on the outs, he was aware of a lot of the temple practices. And so James Strang introduced some endowment practices that were different than LDS, but still Masonic in nature. And so they practiced baptisms for the dead. They attempted to build a temple in Voree or Burlington, Wisconsin, and it never was constructed. They made some plans for it, and so they used the White River in Wisconsin to perform baptisms for the dead. And then when they moved to Beaver Island, they used Font Lake because it's font just like a baptismal font. That's why it's named that to do baptisms for the dead there as well. And he instituted the Order of the Illuminati, featuring phosphorus anointed initiations that culminated in a paramonarchical coronation of James Strang as king in Zion. And so they definitely had some rites that were kind of based on LDS. James Strang had a revelation later on after rejecting polygamy initially. He had a book of scripture called the Book of the Law of the Lord, in which was a translation, at least claimed by James Strang, of the brass plates of Laban. And in the brass plates of Laban, it authorized polygamy. He had, I believe, his legal wife and then four additional plural wives. Um, but of course, they did try to build a tabernacle there on Beaver Island. I don't believe that was completed either. Um, but they attempted to do some of these sacred rites. Even Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, in the red brick store, did some endowments and that sort of a thing. And so Strang tried to follow a lot of the similar things that Joseph Smith did. And oh, by the way, they've got a representation of some plates. Supposedly there was some Masonic imagery. You can see the compass and the square in the slide there, and you can see it on the plates. I'm trying to remember if that was on the plates of Vori or if that was in the Book of the Law of the Lord. I don't remember. But anyway, so that's another group that held LDS style plural marriage and sealings and that sort of a thing. So let's talk about Alpheus Cutler. Alpheus Cutler was the seventh member of the Quorum of the Anointed. And so he had a very legalistic succession. He said, because he was the seventh, that he was seventh in line for succession. And so, of course, Joseph and Hiram were killed in Carthage jail. And then he argues that Brigham Young fell into apostasy, and all the other six people in front of him basically were either dead or apostate. And so therefore he took leadership, establishing his church in 1853. Now, one of the interesting things, I'm trying to remember, was it Christopher Blythe who wrote this, or said it was September 19th, 1853. If you go to the church there in Independence, or the church/temple, it has April 6th, 1853. Of course, April 6th is a very important day, and in all restoration traditions, April 6th, 1830 was the day that the church was the original Church of Christ was organized by Joseph and Hiram, or excuse me, Joseph and Oliver. And then our LDS church was organized April 6, 1860, with Joseph Smith III as the first prophet president of the Restoration, although there's some stuff before 1860 as well. But so it's funny, apparently at least according to historians, September of 1853 was when the Cutlerite Church was established. But on the sign, if you go by their church, it definitely says April 6, 1853. So I don't know if that was backdated or what's going on there. But the Cutlerite Church or temple, they started in Iowa. I want to say Manti, Iowa. Originally, they had a group in Clitheroe, Minnesota, and then another group in Independence. And that's the only group that's left. But the first floor, I think the Manti, Iowa space, was for community trade, secular governance, and traditional chapel worship. And so all three of the buildings, the first floor is kind of a public place. If you if you go to the Cutlerite church in Independence, you can kind of peek in the windows and see, and it kind of looks actually. My AI did a fairly good job of guessing what it would look like. But although the rows are all facing the same direction and in the Independence Church there. But yeah, the first floor was public. The second floor is where the upper room work was done. That's kind of the temple floor. They don't let just anybody come up there. Oh, I should have mentioned earlier with the Whiteite Temple, the endowment was open to the public. Like you didn't have to be a member of Lyman Wyatt's church, which was shocking to me to find that out because definitely in the LDS church, you have to be a good member in standing to even be admitted in the temple. And so that was really interesting to me about the Whiteites. But the Cutlerites are kind of like the LDS in that the second floor is very cut off from, or they don't allow anybody up there. The other interesting thing, so Alpheus Cutler originally, so the church members, they don't like to admit that he was ever, they will argue with you if you say that he was a polygamist, but according to Christopher Blythe and other historians, it looks like he was until about 1851. He didn't like polygamy, and so he basically disavowed it. And so by 1853, he was no longer a polygamist. And so they cite Matthew 22:30 to argue that marriage ended at death. And so that inadvertently erases the eternal sealing theology, especially because they wanted to get rid of the polygamy. My understanding is they still will be sealed, but they will not do, unlike the LDS Church, which does sealings for the dead, the Cutlerites do not do sealings for the dead because of Matthew 22:30. But they do sealings for the living. At least that's my understanding of that as well. So they've preserved sealings, but they've really tried to get rid of the vestiges of polygamy and argue that Alpheus Cutler did not actually practice polygamy. So let's go to the groups that rejected the Nauvoo temple theology and polygamy for sure. And so, of course, I think most people in this group are very familiar with the RLDS Church. I thought it did a very interesting rendering of the auditorium there. It's funny what AI does there. Anyway, so Joseph Smith III, as he took leadership in 1860, formally rejected polygamy and secret endowments. Under his son, Frederick Madison Smith, they built the massive auditorium in Independence. And John Hamer argues, and I think, at least convincing to me, I'd be curious to hear maybe in the little after if the rest of Community of Christ believes, but John Hamer argues that the auditorium was a temple. It was built as a Kirtland style temple worship, but Frederick Madison Smith was trying to move the RLDS church into modernity. And so he didn't want to call it a temple, but John Hamer argues it is a temple. And they've got two assembly rooms, the main hall above, and then in the basement is another big assembly hall. And so he argues that that's very similar. Of course, it's got a dome, which is really cool and interesting, and it's for education. And John argues that that the institutional memory, people have forgotten that the auditorium is a temple, and so that's why 1984 was that, I believe that's when Wallace W. Smith, if I have that right, you guys correct me if that's wrong, decided to announce the Independence Temple that with the big spiral thing that you guys all have. Is that right, Paul? I'll just throw that out there. I won't let that pass. I'll be fact
Wallace
checked.
B, wasn't it, Paul?
Yeah, we've been celebrating the anniversary, so I think you're close. It took some time to get the thing put together, but I think it was 84 when they dedication occurred.
And it was Wallace B., not W. Wallace?
Right.
Okay. Thank you for that correction. Now, one of the things that I kind of skipped was the original Jackson County Temple. Mormons were kicked out of Missouri, never were able to build that. And it wasn't just one temple. I love how AI put this together. There were supposed to be 24 temples. It did not look like that. There, you can see the original plat map. But the idea is there were supposed to be 24 houses of the Lord, and they laid the cornerstones for the first one, and there were also supposed to be 24 temples in Kirtland. Of course, only one was built. And so the first person to return, and I don't actually think he returned, but he said we should return back to Missouri after, of course, the extermination order in 1838. Mormons were exterminated from the state, was Granville Hedrick. He had a revelation that said we should return to Missouri in 1867. His brother, I can't remember his brother's name, but it was Hedrick, was the first to return to the original temple site and purchase land, which was still dangerous. And so the Church of Christ Temple lot is there's a church there. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. But so they own part of the temple lot. John Hamer says, that temple lot's a lot bigger than just what the Hedrickites own. They own this spot where the first temple was, and technically it was the fourth. It was temple number 4, not temple number 1, but it was the first one that was planned to be built. And of course, they tried to build a temple to rebuild a temple in the 1930s. Otto Fetting, who had originally been a member of the RLDS Church, was upset, along with a lot of other people, with Frederick Madison Smith, supreme directional control, and so a lot of RLDS members gave a shot in the arm to the Church of Christ temple lot, and so Otto Fetting was one of those members. They actually excavated for a new kind of a Greek-style temple. Gene Adams has a book called Upon the Temple Lot, where he discusses a lot of this stuff. Otto Fetting eventually fell into disfavor with the Church of Christ Temple Lot. One of the interesting things, especially, I think it's interesting because you guys are the RLDS Church is kind of, or the Community of Christ is having a debate about baptism. But Otto Fetting, even though he transferred his membership over to Church of Christ Temple Lot, there was an agreement between the RLDS Church and the Church of Christ that you didn't need to be rebaptized, that your original baptism in either church was fine. Otto Fetting moves over to the Church of Christ and says, we need to be rebaptized and recommitted. And the church was like, no, we don't do rebaptisms here. You're out of here. And so Otto was, I think he was actually excommunicated from the Church of Christ. And there are some Fettingite churches to this day. But that temple was never rebuilt. There was a giant hole for a long time. And the temple lot, the Great Depression hit. A lot of people, I don't know what I was going to say there, but so there was a big hole when Harry Truman, who was from Independence, returned from being president of the United States. The city went to the Church of Christ and said, "That's a big ugly hole. Can we help you fill that in?" So they filled it in right in time for Harry Truman to come back. But John argues that the auditorium and this Hedrickite temple were kind of in competition with each other. Of course, the auditorium also ran into financial difficulty during the Depression. So did it take 40 years to build? That's my memory. Is that correct? Paul, do you know, or Deb, or?
I don't think so. Some might put that kind of data with it, but no, I think the presentation that we had on the Historic Sites Network with Kristen Mackay
Okay.
was reasonably tight and accurate on that. And yeah, I think it may have taken 40 years to pay it off, but in
Oh, is
terms
that what it was? Maybe that's where the 40
but
was
in
came
terms of
from.
actually getting it built, it was still a couple of decades.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time. But John Hamer argues that there was a little bit of a temple competition between the Hedrikites and the RLDS church, and so they kind of had competing temple visions there. So that's, to me, that's kind of a fun story. Um, so we talked a little bit about the Bickertonite schism. William Bickerton had a visionary experience of a deep chasm separating him from Brigham Young. The interesting thing about William Bickerton, he actually joined. So he was baptized by Sidney Rigdon. He kind of got disillusioned a little bit with Sidney's leadership. Sidney, of course, wanted to reestablish consecration, which failed in Kirtland and it failed in Pittsburgh as well, and or Monongahela. And so William Bickerton actually left and joined with Brigham Young's church for about 9 months. And then in 1852, when the LDS Church announced polygamy as a public doctrine, because up to that it had been a secret doctrine, William Bickerton's like, I'm out of here. I don't do that. And so he picked up the pieces of Sidney Rigdon's church and built that up. And so he entirely rejected the physical temples. He was never part of that. That was not part of his thing. And the secret endowments and the plurality of gods, that sort of a thing. And he emphasized the charismatic gifts. So my understanding is I've been to the church a few times. It's never happened when I come, but they believe in the charismatic gifts. A lot of the same gifts in Kirtland of the speaking in tongues that happened. The Bickertonite Church still practices that. And I should mention previously the Hedrickite or the Church of Christ Temple Lot, they also believe in speaking in tongues, but it's pretty rare from what I understand. But it does happen. But it definitely happens more in the Bickertonite church, but it never happens when I go to church. I'm always bummed. Um, so they believe in Pentecostal gifts like visions, tongues, healing. Um, they have a radical inclusivity. So one of the interesting things was long before, oh, I did forget to mention this about the Strangites, but the Bickertonites ordained women as deaconesses clear back to the 1860s, and they had an African American apostle in the early 20th century. Um, I should mention, since we're talking about ordination of women and how that's kind of related to the temple, um, that the Strangite Church ordains women to be to the office of teacher, and so according to John Hamer, pretty much all women ordained to the office of teacher, and a lot of them have really contributed to Strangite theology, and it was the women who said, "Hey," because the Strangites were kicked out of Voree and they were kicked out of Beaver Island, and it was the women who went back and went through all the records, the times and seasons and everything, and said, "We should go back to Voree," and so that's why they have a big presence in Burlington, Wisconsin today. So that's kind of interesting that with as far as the Bickertonites and even the Strangites, both groups have had limited, I would say, limited ordination of women. And that's what I always get confused. So the Bickertonites ordained deaconesses, the Strangites ordained teachers, just the one office in each church.
Rick,
Um,
could I ask you a question?
yeah, go ahead.
Could you go back to the previous slide? Under charismatic gifts,
Oh,
is that your assessment of why they continued with Pentecostal gifts, or are you quoting somebody there in terms of the removal of the priesthood? I've wondered what it is that determines in the restoration which groups are continue in the Book of Mormon teaching about charismatic gifts and which do not. And my initial assessment has been that the more a group buys into the Smith corpus, the less likely they are to be charismatic. I don't know why that is, but the Bickertonites only hold the Book of Mormon out of the Smith corpus, right?
Yeah, they don't have a Doctrine and Covenants. They've rejected
And
that.
so the business on, because they removed priesthood, the
What do you
true
mean remove
temple.
priesthood?
Well, in your description under charismatic gifts, it says because they removed priesthood authority from physical stone buildings,
Okay.
their
The
true
temple
temple,
priesthood, I guess. Okay.
yeah, the true temple became the wilderness defined by Pentecost. Is that your assessment of that?
That's
Or is that,
AI's assessment of
oh, okay.
that.
Continue.
As far as that, because I think it's a really interesting thing, and thanks for bringing that up. Because one of my favorite stories is, of course, Joseph Smith started in New York, and then they'd sent some missionaries to Kirtland who had great success. And so within about 6 months, Smith moved to Kirtland. And a lot of the saints in Kirtland were very charismatic and were doing a lot of these gifts. Um, and so when Joseph got to Kirtland in, I want to say January 1831, I think that's right. Um, and he sees all these people speaking in tongues. I know Black Pete was an early slave who they called the Lamanite prophet. He was black, but they called him the Lamanite prophet. And Mark Staker argues that speaking in tongues may have been introduced by Black Pete. Um, but Joseph got there and he's like, really uncomfortable with this. I don't think we should be doing speaking in tongues and some of those other. I think the Methodists also had some very charismatic services as well, and Joseph wasn't comfortable with that. And so he kind of stamped it out initially. Well, some missionaries from Kirtland went back to New England and baptized somebody you may have heard of named Brigham Young. And taught Brigham Young about speaking in tongues. And so Brigham was big into it. There was a film a couple of years ago about Brigham Young put out by, was it the Interpreter Foundation or something like that? It was, and they started the movie with Brigham Young speaking in tongues. Like, it was really interesting. And so Brigham Young came to Kirtland, met Joseph Smith for the first time, and Brigham Young reintroduced Kirtland to speaking in tongues. And now, this is me personally speaking. I wonder if it was like a racial issue, like we don't like black people speaking in tongues, but if a white person does it, it's okay. That's me guessing. I don't know. But Joseph kind of re-embraced speaking in tongues in Kirtland. Um, and as far as the LDS Church, um, I just think there just became some discomfort with it, and it's kind of because technically the LDS Church still believes in speaking in tongues, but the idea is, well, that's when you go on a mission and you go to Japan, and all of a sudden you can speak Japanese and that sort of thing. So it's definitely changed in the LDS Church to be like, oh, it's only you're not speaking Adamic or some of these things. Um, William Bickerton, like that was something that was a big part of his conversion with Sidney Rigdon. So it was still around. I mean, he was converted around 1850, I believe. So he wasn't converted until after Joseph Smith was killed. Um, and I don't really know. Uh, I did talk to Randy Sheldon, who's a member of the Church of Christ Temple lot, and I asked him specifically about speaking in tongues, and he goes, "It's rare, but it does happen." And he told me a few stories about it happening in their church. I think like I said, I think it happens more often in the Bickertonite Church. Not that it happens a lot. Um, but it does happen. Um, and Chris, you had said something about rejecting the Smith, because I don't think it doesn't happen in the Community of Christ or our LDS Church. I think they've always been uncomfortable with that. What was your question about Smith?
Yeah, it just seems to me that the more of the Smith corpus that a group adopts, the less likely it is that they're going to be charismatic in their worship.
Okay. So like, and when the Smith corpus, you're talking about the Doctrine and Covenants, basically.
Everything, yeah. And so the Bickertonites are, their Book of Mormon, but that's all out of the Smith corpus.
Well, and to think more about that with regards to the Hedrikites, when I went out there a year ago, the Hedrikites or the Church of Christ Temple Lot um, rejected the Doctrine and Covenants, but have kept the Book of Commandments, which was the precursor to the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah, yeah.
And they rejected a lot of, because there's some changes between the Book of Commandments and the Doctrine and Covenants. And it was funny because the first time I went there 10, 15 years ago, they were like, you pull out your Doctrine and Covenants, and I'm going to pull out my Book of Commandments, and we're going to go over section 20, and you're going to see the differances. And I was like, yeah, I already knew about that. But anyway, but this past year, Randy, I think it was Randy, the same Randy Sheldon told me that they were considering decanonizing and no longer printing, because you could buy a Book of Commandments there at the Church of Christ. And that apparently passed, that they are no longer printing the Book of Commandments.
Mm.
Some argue that it was never really canon. And by printing it, people thought it was canon. And so that was confusing to people. But I do know some members of that church that argue that the Book of Commandments disagrees with the Bible. And so in a sense, they are rejecting the Smith corpus, as you said. And so they do speaking in tongues. So I don't know. That's an interesting idea.
Oh, thanks, Rick.
Yeah. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about LDS, some of the temple rites that are no longer practiced. And one of them is called the Law of Adoption. And so in 1890, following the manifesto, when the LDS Church publicly gave up polygamy, about 4 years later, previous to that, they had been sealing members to generally prominent Mormon leaders, Brigham Young, Joseph Smith, Heber C. Kimball, those kinds of people, in this law of adoption. And the idea, I think, mainly was, there's a scripture in our Doctrine and Covenants, I can't tell you the reference, but it says the same life that you have in this life will be in the next. And so a lot of people were like, my family hated the church. There's no way they're going to join the church. And if I want to be sealed to, Joseph Smith or Brigham Young or Heber C. Kimball, somebody with a good priesthood line, because my father's he's not going to accept it in the next world. He hated Mormonisms. And so that was a common practice from the 1840s. Now, interestingly, that was practiced by the Whiteites. It was practiced by the Strangites. Any others? And it's currently being practiced by the modern fundamentalists who've kind of revived it. But in 1894, Wilford Woodruff kind of got rid of the law of adoption and said, no, we're not going to be sealed to church leaders anymore. When your parents die and your grandparents, they're probably going to accept the gospel, and so you should be sealed to your parents, even if they were hostile to the church. And so that was kind of the end in the LDS Church of the law of adoption, was 1894, and but modern fundamentalists have brought it back, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Between 1919 and 1927, other things happened with the LDS temple worship. The endowment was dramatically revised. The oath of vengeance was omitted. That was a big piece of the Joseph F. Smith's testimony before Congress in the Reed-Smoot hearings. A lot of the graphic penalties from masonry were moderated, and garments were shortened from the ankle to the knee. The baptisms for health were discontinued in 1923. And then, kind of the last straw for fundamentalists was the lifting of the priesthood ban on black members in 1978. They just saw that as like the last straw. So prior to 1978, a lot of fundamentalist Mormons were like, okay, well, if you believe in polygamy, just keep it quiet, join the LDS church, get your first sealing in the LDS temple. We recognize that authority, and then come to us and we'll plural marriage you and all that stuff. But in 1978, they viewed that as they viewed all of these changes, the oath of vengeance and some of those other things, as signs of apostasy in the LDS church. But 1978 was like that was the last straw for them, and so they believe that following the 1978 revelation, that the LDS temples were defiled, and so therefore they had to start building their own temples, and so they have. So we can talk a little bit about the FLDS temple. Obviously, that doesn't look well. I don't think it looks like the one at the YFC's ranch in El Dorado, Texas. But they did have corner turrets and roof crenellations. They had a Nauvoo style steeple, 80-foot limestone and steel frame. This was built by the FLDS prophet Warren Jeffs. It was very isolated. It was purposely isolated, and it was based on the city of Enoch, and it was designed for Christ's apocalyptic return. In April of 2008, a paramilitary-style breach of the temple occurred. It was sparked by a hoax phone call and amplified by apostate atrocities, including tales of underground tunnels, and it resulted in the unlawful seizure of 439 children before the Texas Supreme Court intervened. So it was very traumatic among the FLDS. Warren Jeffs was arrested. Well, he wasn't arrested during the raid, but he went on the run for a long time. He was on the FBI most wanted list, and finally he was caught and arrested and imprisoned for rape as an accomplice for authorizing his own underage marriages to young girls, as well as underage marriages for other members. But these would be very similar to a lot of the LDS style ordinances. They were very, they wanted to follow a lot of the LDS endowments, sealings, that sort of a thing, and of course plural marriages, and that sort of a thing. So Christ Church, they're very interesting. They have two temples. There's one in southern Utah. It's a pyramid-shaped temple. Maybe I will pull this out here for a moment. And I'll stop sharing for just a moment if I can figure out how, so you can see this. Yeah, can I make this big? Whoops, I don't know what that did. But anyway, I've got here, this is a 3D printed model of the temple. I don't know how to change that, but anyway, so this pyramid temple is what it looks like in they call it Paquin, Utah. It's near Modena, Utah, which is west of Cedar City, a long way. And so I was able to stop. Unfortunately, this temple was desecrated by a vandal, and so it's not currently available. It's been closed for renovations, basically. See if I can go back to sharing this again. But they have a second temple in. Does it look okay? I'm getting a weird
Yes.
thinking. Okay, good. Um, so they've got a second temple in Nevada. It's about 30 miles from the nearest big town is Tonopah. You have to drive a lot of dirt roads to get there. It's very in the wilderness, that's for sure. It's about an 8-hour drive from my house. It's really, really remote. Um, but I did an interview with Dan and Ann Hatch. I don't know if they're here. I hope they're here. I told them I was going to be talking about them, so they were very interested in coming. But we actually did the interview inside the temple, so it's my only interview. I know Chris talked about his unique location, but that was very unique because it was inside the temple. I've never done another podcast, and I don't think I ever will inside the temple. And so they have a lot of Star of David imagery. There was a Star of David behind the font, and then there was also at the floor of the font. They have the 12 oxen around, kind of very LDS style in there, and so they argue that they have the multi-hour 1877 St. George endowment. So the first time the endowment was written down was 1877. For the St. George Temple. And so they do second anointings, which is kind of a taboo topic with the LDS Church. The LDS Church does do them, but it's kind of like Fight Club. We don't talk about Fight Club. We don't talk about second anointings. But kind of the idea is if you were lucky enough to be selected for a second anointing, I liken it to being saved in evangelical Christianity. Like you're assured of heaven. There's pretty much nothing you can do to except for murder and denying the Holy Ghost to not be to get to heaven. The Christ Church does baptisms for health, and they have reinstituted the oath of vengeance that was taken out of the LDS temple ceremonies. And so they've tried to preserve a lot of this. Now, the interesting thing about the multi-hour 1877 St. George endowment, Jonathan Stapley says that that's a modern reconstruction. There was no like official 1877 endowment. Jonathan argues it was about 90 minutes as it is now. I think it's about 75 minutes right now, roughly, for an LDS endowment. And so, but the idea with especially the Christ Church, but I think all fundamentalists in general are that they're restoring the pioneer ideal and trying to get back to the apostasy within the LDS Church. So I see Boyd's got his hand raised. What you got, Boyd?
Yeah, Rick, this is
Did you have any
fascinating.
idea, by the way, Boyd, that this would turn into a big, long presentation
I
from
had no clue.
you?
This is something else. I got a question. This baptisms for health. This is the second time you brought this up. What is that? I've never heard of that.
So, so typically, you're probably, well, I think, are you Community of Christ, Boyd? I can't remember.
Actually, I don't believe that. I'm not in any church.
Oh, you're not in anything.
No, I'm on my own.
Okay. Like in the LDS Church, the RLDS Church, the
Let me take that back there for a minute for clarification. I attend the Restoration branch, but I'm not really I attend a Restoration branch, but I'm not really a technical member.
Okay.
I have to get that clarified.
Well, maybe I can ask you this then, because I have not been to any restoration branches, but I would assume, do you believe in the laying on of hands for healing? Do
Yeah.
restoration branches practice that?
Yeah, they do.
Okay. So in Christ Church, it's kind of a similar idea, but sometimes it feels like there's more efficacy if so they will do a similar thing, but they will do it in water and then they will baptize the person, and sometimes the person will be healed and they'll from whatever the malady is. But the idea is very similar to just a laying on of hands type sealing, but they just baptize you as they do it. So it's a extemporaneous prayer, from what I understand, and it's just a little more efficacious than just the laying on of hands. So that's the idea behind it.
Makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Um, so another group are the Missouri Independents. I wanted to put a picture in here. Maybe I'll see if I can find it and I'll show you afterwards. That was one of the coolest temples I've ever been in. I was there a week before the dedication. So the interesting thing about the Missouri Independents, they're very decentralized. They don't have a leader per se. Um, and so they're just kind of, in fact, when I went there, I drove and it's also in the middle of nowhere. It's like the nearest towns are, I think, Humansville on the east and I think Stockton on the west, but it's like it's once again you're following dirt roads for a long time. Um, but very similar to LDS style temples. They have a baptismal font. It's beautiful. Like they really, it's a beautiful font. So they do a lot of the LDS ordinances. Of course, they believe in plural marriage. Um, and they would do all of the same things. I don't know. I haven't asked. I didn't ask about their endowment, but I would assume it would be very similar to Christ Church. Um, the restoring all of these things very similarly that Christ Church does. The interesting thing about these independents, I don't know why they broke away from. It sounds like, I think this is true. It sounds like there was a AUB. Well, we haven't talked about them yet. Apostolic United Brethren temple. And I said temple, but I meant group. There used to be an AUB group in Missouri, and they fell away or whatever, broke away. I'm not exactly sure. And they want to be very ecumenical, and so they built a temple for all independents and any how do I say this? Anyone is welcome. Like they don't have like a temple recommend process like the LDS do, but but you know, because I was like, oh, I'd like to see what that endowment's like, and they were like, yeah, well, we're not like it's not like temple tourism, like you have to be like serious about it and not just I want to experience this. Um, but they will do plural marriage sealings in there. But it's open to any independent. So one of the problems with them, at least from other fundamentalist Mormon points of view, just prior to the dedication of the temple, they kind of have they have a council. So it's not nearly as hierarchical as the LDS church is, but they had a revelation that allowed black people to enter the temple and be sealed. So they're very unique among Mormon fundamentalists that practice polygamy. And so a lot of other groups will not they're like, once again, you defiled the temple by allowing black people in there. And so that's another interesting thing. So they don't have a racial ban like all the other fundamentalist groups do. So they're kind of progressive, at least racially, in that sense. Um, oh, I'm going really long, but we're doing questions as we go, so that's good. Um, Okay, so let's talk a little bit about liturgical authority of women because this is temple related. I mentioned earlier that Michael Quinn, Margaret Toscano, Maxine Hanks argued that women, by virtue of of being endowed or endowed with a form of priesthood, it, they're not formally ordained to an office like teacher, deacon, priest, elder, that kind of a thing, but they have kind of a Jonathan used the word cosmological, but he's kind of backing away from that now, that term. But I think that it still applies. That you've got this kind of charismatic authority. Women used to in the LDS Church until the 1930s, even though they technically didn't hold priesthood, they could lay hands on the sick and anoint with oil and do healing blessings. Um, I'm trying to know. I'm trying to remember if they participated in healing baptisms. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I read that book, but they might have done that as well. And so there was a lot of question about do women have priesthood, and so the church leaders just got so tired of the questions. They're like, just call the elders. Like we don't have this confusion, and so that kind of went away in the 1930s in the LDS Church, where women no longer can lay hands on the sick. But Joseph Smith is quoted as saying, "Hey, if a person is healed, who are you to stop the power of God?" So it is in our history, and Anne Hatch has said that in Christ Church that she's laid hands on her husband when he was sick, and blessed him. So that's something that's another thing that some of the fundamentalist groups have brought back. The Cutlerite tradition officially ordains women as high priestesses in their church to officiate in female temple ordinances. Um, the Bickertonites, we've talked a little bit about them. They've ordained women as deaconesses since the 1860s. I met a few deaconesses when they've come out here to Utah for some of their church services, and then the Church of Jesus Christ in Christian Fellowship, CJCCF. They ordain women. So the men are ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood. The women ordained to the Magdalene priesthood. And then the boys or the men, I don't know if it's boys or men, but they also have Aaronic priesthood for the men and the Miriam priesthood for women. So they are very egalitarian. And so David is the prophet, and his wife, oh, I'm missing her name. Is it Christine? I think her name is Christine. She's the prophetess. So they have a co-presidency together. You can't get any more egalitarian, I think, than them. So that's related to temple priesthood as well. Um, uh, let's see. So just talking a little bit about their temple worship over the internet. They're an internet-based movement, so as long as you have an internet connection, you're good. But they help people establish home temples, donning full temple clothing and Jewish talents. And then people can receive the Kirtland and Nauvoo style endowments over Zoom. They have a very open canon. If you like the Bhagavad Gita and you think that's scripture, you're welcome to use that. They have it's funny because the Strangites no longer have apostles, but they have a Strangite who is an apostle in their church. So they have a Strangite apostle because he really believes James Strang was a prophet, and so that's totally kosher with them. Like, it's all good. Reform Mormonism is very similar. They don't have any sort of hierarchy, but they will help people also do home endowments, and they view it as a symbolic journey that intentionally removes the character of Satan from their sacred drama. And they replace institutional fidelity with covenants to pursue universal truth. And so they're another group that does temple worship outside the Brighamite church. Although I'll go back here for a second. David is a former LDS member, and the groups who started Reform Mormonism are former LDS. So it's not really surprising that they would, they believe in Revelation 2, and they can modify the endowment and the sealing and whatever. Both groups will they will seal gay marriages. I I know Reform Mormonism will even do gay polygamy. I'm not sure. I think that's true in the Church of Jesus Christ and Christian Fellowship. I'd have to ask David about that, but I believe that's true as well for them. So they're very similar, those two groups. And then we're getting down to the end here finally. it's funny because I thought I didn't have enough slides, but I've been just freelancing. Um, so I came across this article in Dialogue about Haiti that was just really interesting to me. Um, so in the 1950s, the LDS temple started building temples overseas. I believe it was Switzerland was the first temple, and they established, stakes in different places. And so Jennifer Husk Basquate observed that some of the Haitian LDS saints sewed Mormonism together with indigenous, and I don't know how you say that, if it's voodoo or vodou. Looks like vodou to me, but I think it's the same thing. Practices rather than mutual exclusion. Do you guys know?
It's voodoo.
It is voodoo. Okay, that's how you say it. Um, so Haitian members view these voodoo practices as complementary to their LDS practices. And so they share an enchanted worldview where there's a thin veil between the living and the dead that can be pierced, and it perfectly aligns with Mormon eternal families with voodoo ancestral veneration. So, so that's kind of an outside the box thing that I just came across that I definitely did not expect that. And so finally, we go from this Masonic shift in Nauvoo, and in the LDS Church, LDS scholars have redefined the Masonic connection, arguing that Smith received an endowment by revelation before initiation, shifting away from Brigham Young's view as Masonry was a corrupted version of the Solomon Temple rites. And so the Mormon Temple is not a singular monolithic narrative. I hope you've seen I think I don't know if Robert puts the titles on the, I would like to call this Divergent Temples of the Restoration, because I really wanted to really dive into Boyd's question a lot more about, and this one focuses mainly on non-LDS temple practices across the Restoration. And then in October, I'll focus more on LDS because I think that's interesting as well. And I think this one was more interesting probably to this group. But the from the two-story wooden meeting houses of the Cutlerites to the Texas fortresses of the FLDS to the Zoom rooms of the Christian Fellowship, the liturgy of the temple liturgy is highly resilient engine across centuries, and diverse branches have adapted Joseph Smith's esoteric rites to forge their own unique connections with the divine. And the next time that I talk to you guys, I will dive more into the Book of Mormon than I did here. And that really should have laid the foundation, but I wanted to do this one first. So I went a long time on that. I did not expect, I thought it was going to be short and it was long. So anyway, thanks everybody. Let's open it up for questions.
All right, let me begin. That's the host's privilege. I do want to go back to clarify that the revelation on the Temple and Independence for the Community of Christ was received in 1984. The ground was broken in 1990. Dedication was 1994, and it was dedicated to be a place of peace. The emphasis upon that temple as a place of peace is rather an interesting factoid. I happen to be writing an article about that factoid to complement what Ken Mulliken is doing in his fractal lab. And so we'll get a report on that later. But did want to just clarify that 1994, so it was the 30-year anniversary we celebrated just a couple of years ago that I was remembering.
Okay.
All right, but thank you, Rick. I'm delighted with your presentation. Even though it went a little bit longer than what we might have anticipated, I can imagine the next one we'll do the same.
I'll try to stick closer to the slides, but I do a lot of freelancing.
That's all right. Not very many people have left, so you've still got questions and answers. I see Shane with his hand up.
Oh, hey, hey, Rick. Good to see you again. It's been a couple of days.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see you at Sunstone. this
Yeah.
weekend?
Anyway, one of the sessions I attended on Saturday morning was the topic was glossolalia, about speaking in tongues, and so one of the things that was mentioned was that in Kirtland people were rolling around on the ground, and so I was wondering, would you think that the Latter-day Saints of Kirtland were the original holy rollers?
Yes, that is actually true. So, in fact, Chris has mentioned that to me before that Mormon Pentecostalism predates Pentecostal Pentecostalism by I want to say 70 years.
Yeah.
Is that right, Chris? I think that's right. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So
And,
so
and
yeah.
what's yeah. What's ironic, the first time I heard about Pentecostals was when I was about 11 or 12 years old. My mom and grandmother were talking about them, how they rolled around on the ground and how weird that was. I had no idea it was within our own church history.
Yeah, it definitely is. I do know that they often referred to the shouting Methodists, and of course, Joseph Smith was partial to the Methodist sect. It says that in his Joseph Smith history account. And so I think, the Methodists were also viewed with suspicion because people didn't like this rowdy shouting Methodists. And so I think a lot of Methodists and Mormons of the day, those were kind of related. And even the first vision account, Methodists had similar visions to the first vision account. So that's well known. So I think the Methodists and the Mormons were probably the first to, but the Mormons actually, I don't think the Methodists spoke in tongues. That's definitely a Mormon innovation, if you will. So,
Just a note on speaking in tongues. Speaking in tongues can be traced in every century of the Christian church. But the innovation in the Book of Mormon was the connection between baptism of fire and spirit and speaking in the tongues of angels, or in other places speaking in tongues. It was the first kind of doctrinal articulation of that, which becomes very much a Pentecostal understanding. And of course, the wonderful irony is that fact embarrasses both groups.
Yeah. Well, I know that's why it's kind of gone out of favor in LDS circles. So,
That's funny.
Could I ask another question?
yeah, go ahead.
Rick, I wondered, it seemed to me as your presentation went on that the people who seemed to most buy in to the Nauvoo temple understanding are the fundamentalists. Because the LDS
Fundamentalist
tradition,
Mormons.
yeah, fundamentalist Mormons, right? Thanks for that. Because the LDS tradition, various things are falling out, right, from Nauvoo. I mean, they continue for a while, but apparently the fundamentalists are the ones who have kept more of the individual components than even the LDS church. Am I understanding that right?
That's definitely, I mean, they would argue it's a restoration of LDS stuff that, LDS jettisoned or whatever.
Gotcha.
But yeah, for sure, for sure. I just did remember though that one of the things that didn't make it into my slides was the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's in the old Chrisman High School across the street from the Independence Temple there in Independence. And they have dedicated a room that is kind of a Kirtland style look. They wanted to put the Aaronic priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthoods on the opposite sides of the room, but because the room had such a low ceiling, they couldn't do that, and so they're in the front. But they wanted to do it, and It does say, I think, if I remember right, House of the Lord or Holiness to the Lord. I think there's a sign as you walk in there, and it's definitely a Kirtland style. And I should have mentioned them in my slide. I just remembered I wanted to mention them. So that group was started in 2000 by Fred Larson, and then it's currently he passed away, and then it's been currently led by Terry Patience. They don't view it as a temple, but it has the look and feel of a temple. I think they would like to build a kind of a better temple, but this is kind of a temporary thing, and it's a house of learning, a house of faith. They have a school of the prophets. So since you mentioned fundamentalists, there are fundamental. I would argue that the Remnant Church are fundamentalist RLDS, and so they're trying to bring back. I think you could argue the Hedrickites are also kind of fundamentalist. You can't argue. You can't really. They're kind of separate from RLDS, so I don't want to say that they're RLDS. Um, but they're kind of fundamentalist in nature, and so yeah. So another group I just remembered was the Nielsen Naylor group. They currently have are making plans for a temple up in Idaho. I think it's going to be in the Malad area. I don't think they have their plans finalized, but I know they've got a congregation up there, so that would make sense for that. And I would expect that to be very LDS style as well. So thanks, Chris. It looks like James has his hand up. I don't know if I'm supposed to do that or if Paul is or Deb.
Go ahead, James.
Yep. And I now figured out what my problem was with my video. So you have to look at me as well as listen to me.
No, your video's off. We don't see you. But anyway.
Oh, you don't? Oh, wait a minute. Oh, all right. Just a second. Well,
we can listen in almost.
Yeah, you can listen to me.
Oh, there you are. You just showed up.
Okay. So one thing that struck me in your presentation, and I don't know, maybe you would get to this in your other presentation, but one thing that struck me was that all of the groups that you've discussed, and you are very knowledgeable about all of the various branches of the restoration, both those that adhere to some form of the Nauvoo form of temple and those that have dropped it. But one thing that struck me, and it kind of struck me especially since you brought up this Haitian group, which I had never heard of before either. But one thing that struck me was that none of your examples were international Mormonism. And I was wondering, is that because you just haven't studied international branches of the restoration, or would you say that international branches of the restoration, in other words, which have split off from the various groups, the various, core, groups, just haven't picked up or developed the temple? In other words, all the groups you're talking about derive from American Mormonism. And I was just wondering, is that because you just haven't had a chance to research this subject in international Mormonism, or do you think that various offshoots of the restoration internationally just haven't picked up on this temple tradition that is so fundamental in one way or another to so much of American Mormonism?
James, you're going to turn this into 3 papers instead of 2. It's already too big. As you were talking, I was thinking there's only two that I'm aware of, but you're right. I kind of did overlook at least those two groups until you brought it up, and I started thinking about it. The two groups that I'm aware of that are international in nature would be Philip Gill's group, which so let's see, I'm trying to remember. His group is called the Restored Branch of Jesus Christ, and he has new scripture. I interviewed him over Zoom because he lives in England. Oh, you know what? You've just given me a great idea, James. That's fantastic because he views Stonehenge as essentially a Mormon temple. It was a Jaredite temple. Um, so the story of so he's got a book called the Book of Jeranek, and then another one called the Book of Aranek. And the Book of Jeranek is the story of essentially, and I'm just oversimplifying this, but essentially a group of Jaredites that broke off and traveled through Russia and over to England and built Stonehenge. And that essentially Stonehenge is a Jaredite temple. So I didn't think about adding them. So thank you. That's a great idea. At first I was thinking, I mean, he doesn't have a temple, but the Jaredite temple, that's great. So thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't thought of that until just
I,
now.
I also just learned just to complicate your life. I also,
Got to
yeah,
get this done by October.
I also just learned at Sunstone that the the third convention group that did not rejoin the LDS Church, that they supposedly still exist. The one that founded by what's his name,
Margarita
Batista.
Batista.
Yeah, uh, now that they were talking about they still exist in Mexico, and we're talking about building a temple. So,
Oh, I hadn't heard that. That's
okay, I just
good to
heard about
know.
it. Somebody mentioned it
Who's
just at Sunstone. So,
email me who gave the presentation because I would be interested in that. I didn't attend that one. So
yeah. So anyway, but I'm just wondering, if you had come across, I mean, you
so
think that in places like the Philippines or Africa, that our whole temple or theology might have a lot of purchase in local cultures, like
yeah.
you indicated it may have had in amongst the Haitians.
The other one that I'm familiar with is the Brazil group. So they have the
Okay.
seal, the Book of Mormon. Is that on my shelves behind me? I never can find stuff when I need it. Because they sent me a copy of their book. And oh, do you have it there? Boyd have it? How do we make Boyd big? I can't make him big, but it looks like he's got one there.
Yeah,
That's different than
this
the
is
one I've
copy.
got. Okay, because
Yeah.
mine's blue, or mine looks, yeah, mine's different. Mine's spiral bound, but yeah. So I don't know. The guy that I spoke with was John Pratt, and he passed away from COVID. So I can't. He's the only contact I had in that group. So I'm not familiar. We didn't talk about temple stuff, but they're a fairly new group. So I would
This
just say,
guy's the Maurice Berger.
yeah, Mauricio
Maurice,
Burgers is the
Maurice,
prophet,
yep.
and he's Portuguese.
Mhm.
I don't know if he speaks English. Do you know, Boyd? Oh, you went on mute.
My
I don't think he
recollection from when
does.
we,
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
think
my
he does either.
recollection
That'll
from
be
when we
tough.
had previous
I've never met
presentations
him, but
about
I've
him
heard
was
about
that
him, and I heard
he
his
did
stuff
not.
is always in Portuguese, and some people complain they can't understand what he's saying. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
What else did you have there, James? I didn't hear that.
Oh, so anyway, I was just wondering,
Yeah.
if this temple stuff, which is in one way, shape, or form so central to all of the American, or at least present in, or dealt with, or survives in some form in all of the forms of American Mormonism, had gotten offshore
I mean,
on.
it's an interesting idea because um, most of these groups, these schismatic groups, have are generally have LDS people. I think Mauricio's former LDS. I know John Pratt. And most of these other groups are like breakoffs of kind of the
Gill in
Brighamite
England is
tradition.
former LDS, right?
So I would imagine, I mean, without knowing more about I don't remember what the Brazil group's called. I don't remember what their group's called. I should remember, but I don't remember. But anyway, I would imagine since they have an LDS background, they'd probably file LDS style temple group. I mean, Matthew Gill has rejected a lot of the um, LDS style, and he seems to have embraced a lot of our LDS style um, worship practices. I know, for instance, with regards to the sacrament, that was a big deal for him. He read in the Doctrine and Covenants that only the priests are supposed to pass the sacrament, so he didn't like deacons and teachers passing it because of the Doctrine and Covenants, which I believe is a RLDS uh, thing as well, and a Hedrickite for that matter. Um, so, so yeah, thank you. That's a great question.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to your third paper.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Let me unblur for just a second here. Are you familiar with the Namenha group?
No,
The Mentina Archives?
I'm not familiar with them.
Okay, this is a group. Oh, let's see. They started producing. Um, this fellow translated these records down in Manti area of Utah, and
Okay.
there's like eight or nine volumes of this called the Mentina Archives. And nowadays they call it the Namenha record, but this has the entire temple ceremony in them, except they refer to a Heavenly Mother.
Okay.
Okay, so they have some differences between the LDS endowment ceremony, but they've actually got the whole thing in here. Otherwise, it's almost completely. But this, they're I don't know. You have to look up the history of this fellow, but his name is Philip Landis, also known as Cloudpiler. And I met him years ago, and I read some of his volumes before he published them, and I kind of followed it for a while, and then pretty soon I said, okay, enough. But anyway, it's a record of Hagoth. You remember when Hagoth and and some of they went north in the Book of Mormon. Well, this is like a takeoff of the Book of Mormon, and they tell about the Native Americans and their travels up, through the Colorado River, and then ultimately, fill in all of North America, and lots of new names, never heard of before, but also talks about Alma and so forth. But yeah, they're interesting, but it's up to you whether you believe them or not, when you read them, but they're interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, email me at gospeltangents@gmail.com if you have any contact information or just so I don't forget about that. I think I
Okay.
may have heard something, but I really know nothing about them. I don't know anything. So
If I can find them real quick, I'll try to drop it in the chat.
yeah, that'd be great. I do have a question. I know Paul's got his hand up, and so I want to direct this to the RLDS members. Oh, what was my question? Oh, I know. Here's my question. So I'm going to ask you, and then Paul, you can ask me. Um, do you guys agree with John Hamer that the auditorium should be considered a temple?
No.
Okay. Deb, is Deb here? Or Robert? Do you have the same answer? Or did they walk away? Who else is RLDS here? I'm just curious. Just shout out a yes or no.
I'm not
No.
familiar with that except as some vague similarity kind of thing, but certainly no definitive doctrine like that.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Shane, you think it is a temple?
No, I really don't, because it was never presented to the church as a temple.
Yeah.
Okay. So John's a minority view, it sounds like.
Definitely. there was no revelation in our doctrine and covenants designated the building of a temple that would be the auditorium.
Okay.
But we do give John the right to his opinion.
Well, and we would recognize there are some similarities in function. However, Rena and I were married in that auditorium in its small chapel, which has been turned into a bookstore. But the overall functionality of the auditorium, while it would have some similarities, I can appreciate what John Hamer is saying, but I just simply, in answer to you, I don't like to deal with yes or no questions very well, but that's one I'm reasonably emphatic about. But now that I have three points that I need to bring up to you. First is the most important one, and it comes from 16th chapter of Alma in the Restored Covenant edition, and it says, "The Lord hath said he dwelleth not in unholy temples, but in the hearts of the righteous doth he dwell." And you may have noticed in my opening prayer and verse that I was giving emphasis to the idea that we are the temples that are the most important, not the buildings that we construct. And I find that reinforced in the Book of Mormon. And so I'm a little bit curious that will be something you get to address next session, because you indicated that you're going to be drawing more clearly from the Book of Mormon itself. But to me, there's at least two places in the Book of Mormon that are converging on that point, that the worth of the individual is the temple that the Lord is most concerned with, and that we should be focusing upon righteousness there. Second, Emma Smith, in my research on the Mansion House, I recall reading that Emma Smith was baptized for health in the Mississippi River.
Oh,
several times. And so I'm confident that can be documented.
wow, that's cool. That's good information. Thanks.
And third, because, Boyd just mentioned Hagoth. Hagoth is identified among the Polynesians, and the Polynesians have a wide assortment of temples. And for the Faura family to understand that Hatota was one of their ancestors who came to settle and help to establish temples would be another possible angle for your international approach.
Oh, thank you.
And so, thank you. I appreciate. Wow, what a widely diverse body of research you pulled together for us tonight. It's delightful. Thank you for it, and good presentation. In spite of the fact that you ended up with three. Looks like we got three, maybe four sessions.
I think two's going to be my limit. I might just have to limit the scope, but maybe, yeah, we'll see.
For us,
I think I'm going to make that October deadline with 3 papers, but
well, you get the October one for go back to the Book of Mormon and tell us what it says, because I'm raising that point that it really focuses upon the value of the individual temple, not the temples of building, because they get torn asunder.
Okay.
And I do want to also open up the opportunity for you to expand, because you've been here before. We hope to have you come back multiple times in the future. You're consistently coming up with interesting information for us. Hey, Boyd's got his hand up.
Well, Rick, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. It was quite interesting.
Well, you're the whole blame.
Well, I didn't come up with all that stuff. The temple in Kirtland, by the way, you being LDS, have you heard anything about what the LDS is going to do with it? Are they going to change anything in it, or are they going? For instance, like the name of the temple on the front, it says it's the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They took Christ out of it. Are they going to put Christ back into it, or are they going to change in the architecture of it and make an actual temple like the rest of them in it? Or you heard anything like that?
So I'm not privy to anything. I do know a few archaeologists, or I don't know if that's what they're called, but anyway, people who deal with historic buildings, I'll just say it that way. there's a 15-year agreement between the LDS Church and the Community of Christ that we're not going to do anything pretty much other than, maybe reinforce some things. For 15 years, it's going to be open just as it was. And after 15 years, anything goes, I guess. But the current thinking, at least as I understand it, is they're gonna keep it as it has been. At least that's the current idea. So there are no plans to tear it down. I don't know. I'm still upset about the Salt Lake Temple. So sometimes you're like, oh, do you trust them? But anyway, um, but and I could go off on the Salt Lake Temple, but maybe I should say that for the next time. But um, there's no plans. I do know. The last time I went there after our church had purchased it, I walked in and the rope that rings the bell was missing, and I'm like, "Where's the rope?" Because I remember I was there, and Tom Kimball rang the bell. Was it Tom or maybe it was Seth? I don't think it was Seth Bryant. Seth Bryant rang the bell, and Tom Kimball got mad at him and said, "No, you can't do that." And I was told, because I was like, "Where's the rope?" And I was told that the LDS Church was worried that somebody was going to pull the bell down on top of everybody, and that there was like a structural problem, and so they took away the rope because they didn't want that to happen. Like, no, they didn't want people yanking on the rope. Um, so I know that they're going through and trying to they want to reinforce the building. They want that building to be around forever. With regards to the Salt Lake Temple, um, the LDS Church has, because I'm still upset that they got rid of all the murals. Now, I understand why they did. They want to make this earthquake safe, and I don't. With what I've been told, I don't know if I should share. I'm not going to share it because I don't know if I should share it. But the idea is they want to make this earthquake safe, and they've actually, well, this has been on TV, so I feel comfortable with this. Um, I'm I'm pretty certain they just gutted the inside, which just breaks my heart. Um, and on the outside that's in granite, they've drilled down and put steel rods like all around the outside of the building to strengthen it in case of an earthquake. And I will say this because I've heard this. You guys probably aren't familiar with the old Ogden Temple or the Provo Temple. Those were pretty torn down, like gone. And the reason why was because they had a foundation like this, and then they kind of called it like the wedding cake. Like, you should look up the old Ogden Temple. It looks like a white wedding cake, and then it's got a big steeple here. But the problem is the way that's constructed. So you've got these cantilever things. So there's nothing underneath, the edges of my fingers here. And so if in an earthquake, that building would just come down. Like, it was very structurally unsound, both Provo and Ogden. I know Ogden had some issues with an underground river that was kind of eroding the foundation. So that was another reason to tear it down. And a lot of people didn't like the look of it. I went on a date with a Lutheran girl. This was 30 years ago because I've been married for 26. And we were driving by the Ogden Temple, and she points at the building. She goes, "What's that?" And I go, "That's the Ogden Temple." And she goes, "That's ugly." And I was like, "You can't say that." I was almost offended that she said it. But Ogden and Provo were known. In fact, I think me and John talked about it yesterday. I can't remember if that was on camera or off, but that a lot of people didn't think it was very attractive. People didn't want to get married in it because it wasn't an attractive building. And the new building is beautiful. But I still like, you can't be tearing down temples. What are you doing? The history in me is just like, oh. And so I'm sure and Salt Lake does live on a earthquake fault line. And so they want that building to be around forever. And so it makes sense that they would drill those rods in, and I think they've put it on like ball bearings so that in the event of an earthquake, it's going to stay stabilized as it's rolling around. And I just don't think those Pioneer Temple murals, as beautiful as they were and as iconic as they were, I don't think with what the seismic upgrades they were doing to the Salt Lake Temple, I don't think that they just wouldn't survive. And so, as heartbroken as I am that those are gone, I'm at least like, well, put them back, or put a reasonable facsimile back. Like, don't, because they've done that. They did it to Logan. They did it to St. George. Like, it's a beautiful building. But the thing about Kirtland, like the thing that I love about Kirtland is when you go in and that wood is like 150-year-old wood. Like you can tell. And if you go into the Manti Temple, like they've got those weird knobs that are old fashioned, that are, they don't shut right, and and the floor is not level, but the St. George is like perfectly machined. It's beautiful floor, but it's not Pioneer floor, and it bothers me. So what are they going to do with Kirtland Temple? I want them to leave it as is, but given the current construction standards versus, I mean, I did a special tour of Kirtland with Sunstone back. It was before COVID. I'm sure it was before COVID. So it's been 6 or 7 years, 7, 8 years, 9 years. And you could see the literal stones that they built. That's not, and I don't know if Kirtland was on an earthquake zone, but there's no way that that's earthquake safe, guaranteed. Like, these are just rocks sitting on each other, and it's why the outside of the facade is cracking, and it's why they've always had problems with the facade cracking. And so I'm sure they want to fix it. And I'm like, look, if you're going to restore it, because the original Kirtland Temple wasn't white, it was kind of a granite bluish gray, and it sparked. They with Robert Millett, is that his name? I think they got the name wrong, but Arthur Millett, whatever the guy's name was, the guy that the crushed up plates or whatever, which isn't a true story, but anyway, they made it sparkle so it looked like real granite, and they painted lines in it, and I think it had was it a red roof, or anyway, very stark colors. It looked very different. The color scheme was very different. I remember going into the visitor center and being like, so if the LDS Church wants to do that, I'm totally cool with that. Like, make it look like it did in 1836. Like, I'm cool with that. I don't know if there are earthquake problems. I don't know how you make the Kirtland Temple earthquake proof, because there's no way with the building standards of the 1830s that building's earthquake proof. Like, no way. And so those are hard decisions, definitely above my pay grade, but I'm like, I don't know. I just like the old buildings. I went to the Manti Temple about a month ago, just on my own. And I went and I did a temple session, and then I got in the Celesta room, and I was just like, because I haven't been there very often. And so I was like looking around in the Celesta room, and there was a ceiling room off to the side. And one of the temple workers could tell I was being nosy. And you never know, like, can I just walk around here? And she goes, would you like to see the assembly room on the fourth floor? And I was like, yes. And so she gave me directions, and then I just started walking around, just checking out stuff. And it's a fine, if you're a temple recommend person, that's a fine thing to do, apparently. Like, but I was just, and then she's like, oh, and then let me show you this place where there's this skylight and you can see the outside of the temple, and I'm just peppering her with questions. I was just like, this was fun. It was fun. I went with my wife to the Manti Temple open house a couple of years ago because it was redone. They were going to do the same thing to it that they did to Salt Lake, and then everybody freaked out and said, don't do that. And so they didn't. So thanks everybody. But and I was just like so fascinated with it, and she's like done with the tour, and I'm like spending an extra half hour asking questions. She's like, come on, let's go. But anyway, that was a really long answer. So do I know what they're going to do with Kirtland? I don't know. But these are the kinds of decisions I think that have to be made. I know for a fact they've got structural engineers in there trying to figure out what to do, and they're hard questions. I can't imagine that they're going to be drilling steel rods like they did in the Salt Lake Temple, which finally the scaffolding is down. This weekend I was driving down, and I was like, because I hadn't seen it for a while, because there's been scaffolding around it forever, and I was like, wow, that it's like brighter, it shined. They sandblasted the thing. It looks beautiful, and they're going to open it up next year, I think, for 6 months for an open house. So y'all need to come. It's a 6 month open house. Like they're expecting a ton of people. I hope I'm not disappointed. I want them to at least put the murals back. Like, recreate them or something. And I have a feeling they won't, and I'm going to be disappointed. But
Did they take out the murals out of the Manti Temple?
no, no, no. And in
Okay.
fact, yeah, well, I will tell you this. So the Cardston Temple reminds me a lot of the Manti Temple.
Mhm.
And my son got married in Cardston last summer. And so that was the first time I'd been to Cardston, Canada, because his wife's from there. Well, she's from Alberta, but and I was surprised how dark the Cardston Temple was, because I think Terry Walker told me that was the fifth temple in the LES church. And they're building a new temple in Lethbridge. And so once they get the Lethbridge temple done, they're going to close Cardston to renovate. I know with Manti, like they'd put a lot of varnish on it on the murals, and so it had become very dark. And I think that's the problem in Cardston. So they have to, and I don't know how they do that. But they peel off all the varnish and brighten it. I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. But that's the plan. And I would assume, and I'm pretty sure they did the same thing in Manti. Um, so the interesting thing for those of you who are temple geeks, so I went to Cardston and I was really happy that you progress from room to room to room. So they have a film, and apparently Salt Lake they're going to put a film in. That used to be a live endowment. You'd have temple workers that would flub up their lines and whatever. But I don't know. That to me that was charming. Like that was part of the charm. And so Manti has a film now. And Cardston has a film, but at least in Cardston you go from room to room to room. And in Manti, it was just one room, and I was very disappointed. But that temple worker, she's let me see all the other rooms, but it was dark and I couldn't really see, and I didn't want to turn on the light. But yeah, so that was kind of a bummer in Manti. I was bummed about that. So.
Well, I got a ton more questions, but we don't have time tonight. So,
well, yeah,
but I appreciate
sorry. I'll try to.
I really appreciate it, but
Yeah,
that was great.
I got a little way too excited about this, I think. So I thought I was going to be short too.
Well, I recognize that it is after 10 o'clock, and so that's normally our termination time. And I think it is appropriate for us to conclude. I am looking forward to the next presentation because the personal temple idea is something that I'm particularly interested in, and that will show up in the selection I've chosen to sing us off with. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary, Lord, for you. May the living sanctuary in each of you be blessed by our session tonight and with a good spirit to go with you forever. Good night, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.
Oh, Mr. Blair.
Yes.